The Democratic Alliance is holding its federal Congress this weekend. It's being touted as one of the most important in the party's history. Racial quotas have been the focal point of discussions ahead of the meetings. eNCA's Nickolaus Bauer is once again standing by to talk to us. Nick, I understand that you've got John Steenhuisen there with you. He has written a letter calling for the scrapping of a proposal to extend Mmusi's tenure by 2 years. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes, good afternoon to you, Bungi. We were in the middle of the lunch break here at the DA Congress, and the Congress officially underway, getting going with that opening address by Mmusi Maimane, the federal leader that stands unopposed. Arguably the second most important and powerful position in the party, that of DA Federal Council Chairperson, also unopposed, that standing there by James Self. The battle will come in terms of who's going to become the new federal chairperson, or perhaps it'll be Athol Trollip that gets re-elected. But to talk about the speech and a couple of other issues that have come into sharp focus in the run-up to the Congress is the Chief Whip of the DA in the National Assembly, John Steenhuisen. John, your initial thoughts on Mmusi Maimane's opening address?
I thought it was great. I think it was exactly what a Congress speech needs to be. It needs to speak to our values and our principles, but also has to rally the troops ahead of the election phase that we're going into. And I think Mmusi landed all of those, as well as our offer about what we want for South Africa, very clearly in that opening address. And I think it ticked all the right boxes.
Well, you know, we had the DA federal leader reiterate that the DA is a home to all South Africans, regardless of background, creed, sexual orientation, or anything of the like. You know, and he kept on saying black, white, coloured, Indian all have a home in the DA. Has it got anything to do with the fact that the DA has been grappling with this amendment to the Constitution over diversity?
Well, I think that there's been a lot of to and fro over the issue of diversity in the party, but I'm very confident that there's not a single delegate in this hall today who doesn't acknowledge the fact that we have to have diversity in our organisation. We have to represent the full spectrum of South Africa. So anybody who looks at the DA, no matter where they come from, sees something of themselves represented in our structures and in our leadership. And I think that's what we've been grappling with. But this can't come because we're a liberal party, we have a liberal underpinning at the expense of non-racialism. And so I think that the debate has been around how we ensure diversity in our structures, how we strive for diversity without having to resort to crude racial nationalism of quotas and having to fill things through racial bean counting.
So that essentially cuts to the heart of the matter, because the DA was suggested as though it's toying with the idea of embracing racial quotas, and there's a pushback in terms of saying within the DA there's members that believe you can bring about diversity without implementing quotas. But how are you going to do that?
Well, it's the way we've been doing it. I mean, our party has become more diverse in every single election, every single Congress, over every single year that we exist. And I think that the diversity represented on the stage, particularly if you look at the provincial leaders of the provinces that stood behind Mmusi and were introduced today, 8 of the 9 provincial leaders are South Africans of colour, with one white provincial leader in Limpopo, Jacques Smuller. And I think this shows that, you know, at the higher echelons of the party, diversity is there. We have a black leader, we've got a white chairperson, we've got a black, white, and 2 people of different races contesting every position. And you do it by ensuring that space is provided, that you help empower individuals within the party and grow them through the party. Just parachuting people in with race quotas will lead to a dilution of what the real values that have underpinned this party and its predecessors dating back to the 1950s.
But how exactly do you ensure that your caucuses become more representative? Because there is the argument that you look at the National Assembly and it isn't representative. You know, I understand that you're not going for an exact mirror representation by enforcing it through quotas, but the fact is that a lot of your caucuses around the country, from councils to legislatures to the National Assembly, aren't necessarily as representative as the DA would like them. You speak to DA members, senior DA leadership. How are you going to solve something like that?
Well, we're not looking for representativity, we're looking for diversity. And I think if you look at the DA caucus in the National Assembly, it is by far the most diverse caucus in that chamber in terms of representing both race, gender and geography. And the same is happening in our councils and in our legislature. But it is done through a process where our candidate selection procedures ensure that when electoral colleges sit, when selection panels sit, that these issues are front front and foremost in the minds of those people that are sitting on those panels, so they are mindful of the fact that the list that is produced at the end of the day must be something that's racially diverse, that's diverse not only in race, but diverse across a whole host of other things, sexual orientation, gender. And I think that's what the problem is with this debate, is that when people talk about diversity, it tends to become a black-white thing. Diversity embraces far more than just the color of somebody's skin.
So let's talk about the other potential constitutional amendments that will be put out to the floor during discussions over the course of this weekend, one of them being term limits. The term usually for a DA Congress is 3 years. There was a proposal to bring it through to 5 years, much in the same way as other big political parties do it, such as the ANC. You were the author of a document that said that would threaten accountability if you change from 3 to 5.
Absolutely. I agree that that 5-year term is far too long. I think that leaders have to interact and be held accountable by the people that put them in positions of power and authority. We already had an extension. The last Congress moved from every 2 years to 3 years. And let's be very careful. This is not about term limits. It's not about limiting anybody's term in office. It's about the frequency of our Congresses. So, Helen Zille was the leader of the party for over 10 years. She got re-elected every 2 years. Tony Leon as well. There was no limit on their terms. It was about how often we have Congresses. And I think it's very good for the democratic health of an organization to regularly touch base with our core voters, the very people in this hall today who are the Democratic Alliance, and you don't end up with imperial leadership that simply only has to worry about being held accountable every 5 years.
But John, that's got nothing to do with confidence or lack thereof that you may or may not have in the current leader, Mmusi Maimane.
Of course, and that was very clear in the letter, and that's also something that got horribly distorted by the media. This is not about personalities, it's about principle. And in fact, the letter that I shared with delegates said very specifically that this may be a comfortable proposal with the current incumbents, but we should never cast a constitution with individuals or personalities involved. We have to have an eye on the future, because this constitution is going to carry us through long after Mr. Maimane and I and others have left the political stage. And we want to leave a party that is a healthy democratic party and that holds its leaders accountable. Also, this myth around 5 years, helping efficiencies, hasn't worked out terribly well for the ANC. You've now had 2 very messy recalls as a result of that 5-year term. All
right, so last question from us. There was this sort of pushback from within the party over these controversial constitutional proposal, the proposed amendments to the constitution of the DA. They in a way maybe have been watered down slightly or changed in such a way that's more palatable to the entire part of the senior leadership within the DA. Is it fair to say that you guys have resolved, but in many ways, you're divided on these important issues?
Well, I think the Federal Council yesterday, debated and hammered out a lot of them, and I think there's a number of compromises were made along the way, and I think that what's going to be presented to the floor today is something that any freedom-loving Democratic Alliance member will be happy with. We recognise the need for diversity, but at the same time, we recognise that we will never achieve that goal if we go down the same route that the African National Congress and the EFF do in a race to the bottom around, quotas and those sorts of things. So I think we're going to emerge from this united. I think that there's nothing in that resolution that no freedom-loving Democrat in this hall today would find disagreement with.
Right. If you've just joined us, we're at the Democratic Alliance Elective Congress here at the Tshwane Event Centre. That was DA Chief Whip in the National Assembly, John Steenhuisen, talking about diversity and other possible constitutional amendments at this Congress. We'll be with you throughout this afternoon as well as back tomorrow morning when voting gets underway at 6 a.m. to decide on that critical position of DA Federal Chairperson. Back to you, Bongiwe.